Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great conversation, and I'd like to respond to some of the things that I heard from the other side as well. Mr. McClintock mentioned this already. I'd like to remind everyone in regards to the debt limit. There was one vote to increase the debt limit, and that was the House. There are three parties. It takes three parties to increase the debt limit. That's the House, the Senate, and the President. If you don't like our plan, why isn't the Senate passing a bill? Why isn't the President proposing something? The folks on the other side keep going back to the clean debt limit, but that just doesn't hold water because there's been negotiations around debt limit discussions a majority of the time. So ignoring the desire of House Republicans to begin to put us on a better fiscal path just does not recognize the political reality. We've had an election. The House is in the majority. We don't agree with the massive spending that's taken place under this administration, and there needs to be some compromise. And we don't expect to get everything that we want, but certainly no one's going to get a clean debt ceiling here. And so for months, we've been asking for this negotiation to take place. And it will take place, and I think we're going to get this done. Everybody understands. We agree on one thing, that we do not want to default, and that won't happen if we get to the table and conclude these negotiations in the next few days. And then another point, and I think that we're on a pathway that could end in disaster over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And so it's frustrating to hear this, partisan blame going back and forth. Some of the opening comments of the ranking member. When are we going to get serious about that trajectory? And that's what we're attempting to do. And you talk about we're doing this in the abstract, and then when you talk about specific line items, it's hard to make the cuts. But that's what we're elected to do, to put ourselves on a better path. And I'd like to remind the ranking member in Pennsylvania, he and I were both there in 2008, when we were forced, because we didn't have revenue coming in, to look at every single line item in the budget. And yes, every line item has a constituency, so it's very tough to make these decisions. But I believe, and I think all of us, believe that there's been a massive expansion of the federal government intruding in every area of our lives, and we have to pull it back because we know it doesn't end well if we don't move us on the right path. And so, on this debt relief bill that we did, the public thinks it's perfectly reasonable to go back to the spending levels of COVID when we were at all-time high because of COVID. So going back to what we were spending 6 months ago and then trying to limit spending increase by 1% per year, that's reasonable. And then pulling back COVID dollars that aren't spent, that's reasonable. And then expecting people who are relying on government for help, expecting them to put forth the effort to go to work, that's reasonable. That has support from the public. So what is it about our plan that the other side doesn't like? I'd like to hear. I'd like to see a plan come from the Senate. I'd like to see the president come to the table. I think it's time we do that. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, you talked about the excessive regulation. I know you do a lot of work on this, and I appreciate your work. I was a business owner, saw that myself, saw the impact on a growing business. But why should an everyday American who's not a business owner care? We do talk about regulation in the abstract, and I know that there are some regulations needed. We all expect that. You mentioned excessive regulation. I wish you had more time. I'd like some framework of what we could use to consider excessive, but we know that the federal government has ballooned, and it's really affecting people's freedom to make their own decisions. But why should an everyday American who goes to work every day care about this growing federal government that thinks they can make decisions for you that you can't make better yourself? Why should they care?
The barriers to entry will produce fewer choices. You'll have fewer places you can go to get the things you want. You'll have less variety of products on the market. They'll cost more. And in the end, your wages won't go as far and your standard of living will not be what it should be. And those are things everybody would experience every day.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.